Most believers fast with their stomachs, but the wise fast with their clocks. Why does your fasting feel empty while others break through? Why you? Why? For several years, I was a timing specialist for a powerful East African coven. My job was to attack devoted believers when they were weakest. But there were 5 divinely ordained hours that terrified us. 5 specific windows when fasting believers became completely untouchable and every demonic assignment against them failed. If you fast but see no result, if you pray yet attacks intensify, if you watch others advance while you stay stuck, you are likely fasting at the wrong time. Your discipline is not the problem. Your timing is. In the spirit realm, certain hours carry supreme authority. Fast during them, and it is like plugging into heaven's power source. Miss them, and you leave a door open to the enemy. In this exclusive revelation, I am exposing the 5 divine fasting hours that made witchcraft impossible. Straight from my former coven playbook. This is not theory. This is battlefield intelligence from behind enemy lines. Before you discover the first hour that unleashes the same power that restores destinies and raises the spiritually dead, help this message reach every believer under attack. Engage the like button and subscribe right now. Every like tells the platform this revelation is vital. Every subscription breaks another chain of silence. Then keep watching. Your journey into the 3 a.m. watch, the watch of total spiritual dominion, begins now. Stop fasting in the dark. Start fasting by the divine clock. Your breakthrough is not missing. It is just mistimed. These are the exact divinely ordained hours that rendered certain believers absolutely impervious to our touch. If you have been engaging in fasting without witnessing tangible results, this message is specifically for you. If your fasting has felt ineffective and powerless against the relentless attacks in your life, this revelation is your key. If you have watched fellow believers receive dramatic breakthrough while your own situation remains stagnant despite your discipline, this teaching addresses your situation directly. If you have been assaulted during your fasting periods and wondered why the adversary seemed to possess precise intelligence about your moments of weakness, what I am about to share provides your answer. Within the kingdom of darkness, we operated according to a particular principle. We would say most believers fast only with their stomachs, but the wise fast with their clocks. What did we mean by that? We meant that the timing of your fast carries equivalent spiritual weight to the act of fasting itself. Certain hours on the divine clock carry specific and potent spiritual authority. When a believer consecrates themselves through fasting during these sovereign periods, it is as if they are plugging directly into a celestial power source that we simply could not override or circumvent. My name is Zawadi Ochieng from Nairobi, Kenya. For a harrowing period of 13 years, I served in several roles within one of the most feared coven networks in the East African region. One of the positions where I excelled was operating as a chronometric specialist. My precise assignment was to coordinate and launch spiritual assaults during those specific hours when devoted believers were at their most vulnerable state. I possessed intimate knowledge of when believers slept, when they engaged in prayer, when they undertook fasts, and most critically, when their spiritual defenses were entirely lowered. However, there existed 5 specific hours of fasting that provoked absolute terror within our ranks. 5 distinct temporal windows when believers who were fasting became completely untouchable to our operations. When believers discerned and utilized these hours, every single assignment we dispatched against them was rendered impossible to execute. The divine liberated me from that bondage, and now I am called to expose every concealed operation of the kingdom of darkness. Today I will unveil to you these 5 potent fasting hours. These are not arbitrary times selected at random. These are not mere gentle suggestions. The first fasting hour is 3 a.m. We designated this the hour of total spiritual authority within our coven. 3 a.m. was the designated period for launching our most devastating and crippling attacks. This was when the majority of believers were in their deepest, most restorative sleep. This was when their spiritual defenses and alertness were at their absolute lowest point. This was when we enjoyed maximum unobstructed access to homes, to dreams, and to destinies. However, when a believer was both fasting and praying at 3 a.m., the entire spiritual atmosphere surrounding them underwent a radical shift. It was like an impenetrable fortress materializing instantaneously around them. Our assignments could not penetrate its walls. Our spiritual emissaries could not gain entry. Our meticulously laid plans would fall apart completely. The ancient texts declare of the one who rises before dawn to cry out for help, who waits in hope and whose eyes are awake through the watches of the night in meditation and expectation. This exemplifies the posture of the warrior who seizes this watch. Allow me to narrate the account of a woman named Mama Baridi from Kisumu. Mama Baridi was a trader in the local market who had been specifically targeted by our coven because her business was prospering remarkably, while the enterprises owned by our coven members were failing. She sold provisions in a small shop near the central market, and her store was perpetually full of customers, whereas the shops owned by our members remained empty. Our senior queen assigned me personally to coordinate her utter destruction. She instructed me that Mama Baridi had to be made a public example. Her logic was that if we could not cause our own members to prosper, we could at least destroy their competition. I was given a strict deadline of 6 months to bankrupt her completely. I commenced by studying her daily pattern. I observed her through our network of monitoring spirits for 2 full weeks. She woke at 5:30 every single morning. She opened her shop at 7 a.m. She closed at 8 in the evening. She attended fellowship gatherings regularly. She appeared to be an ordinary, devoted believer with no extraordinary spiritual power evident. For the initial 2 months, our operations worked perfectly. We dispatched spirits of confusion to scatter her loyal customers. Individuals who had patronized her shop for years abruptly began purchasing from other establishments without understanding their own reasons. We manipulated her suppliers to treat her with contempt. They sold her goods at inflated prices and delivered inferior quality products. We caused her stock to spoil mysteriously. Bread would mold overnight. Beverages would lose their quality. Canned goods would deteriorate. Her business began to decline precisely according to our plan. By the conclusion of the 2nd month, her daily sales had plummeted by 68%. Her regular clientele had virtually disappeared. Her shelves were now filled with products no one desired to purchase. I was confident that by the 4th month she would be declared bankrupt. Then a profound change occurred. One of our monitoring spirits returned with a deeply disturbing report. The spirit stated, "Mama Baridi is awake." I inquired what time it was. The spirit replied, 3 a.m. I believed it to be a mistake. No ordinary believer awakens at 3 a.m. That is the hour of deepest human sleep. That is the hour when we enjoy maximum spiritual access. But the spirit was not mistaken. I dispatched stronger, more perceptive spirits to investigate. They returned with the identical report. Mama Baridi was not merely awake. She was engaged in fasting and prayer. She was on her knees at 3 in the morning, fervently calling upon the name of the divine. Her prayers were not casual or routine. They were passionate outcries, accompanied by tears. She was declaring sacred texts aloud. She was applying divine covenant protection over her business, her family, and her very life. Its senior spirits overseeing the operation relayed something that concerned me profoundly. They said that when they attempted to enter her dwelling during her prayers, they could not penetrate past the doorway. A tangible barrier of intense light prevented their entry, a phenomenon that had never before occurred during our prolonged attacks against her. For the ensuing week, we watched her every single night. She rose at 3 a.m. without fail. She would pray until approximately 5 a.m. Then she would rest briefly before continuing her day. She maintained this discipline while also fasting from food for a period of 21 days, consuming no breakfast, no lunch, only a modest meal in the evening after sunset. By the end of that first week of her strategic fast, something remarkable began to transpire. Customers started returning to her shop. Not only her previous customers, but also new patrons who had never purchased from her before. They arrived from other districts of Kisumu. Some journeyed from neighboring towns. When we interrogated them through our influencing spirits regarding their choice, they claimed they did not know. They simply felt an inexplicable draw to her establishment. By the end of the 2nd week, her suppliers began to approach her with apologies. One supplier came to her shop in tears. He confessed that he had been systematically cheating her and begged for her forgiveness. He offered to supply her goods at substantially reduced prices to compensate for his prior dishonesty. We had not released him from our spiritual influence. He had broken free on his own. By the conclusion of the 3rd week, Mama Baridi's business was more flourishing than it had ever been. She was compelled to hire 2 assistants to manage the influx of customers. Her shop was overflowing with both products and people. When I reported this catastrophic failure to our senior queen, she was not surprised. She told me, "Zawadi, you should possess greater understanding. 3 a.m. is the hour when the heavens open most widely. A believer who is fasting at 3 a.m. is operating with the identical authority that the divine releases at the height of spiritual power. There exists nothing we can successfully execute against that level of consecrated authority. The ancient texts confirm this principle. Even the greatest spiritual leaders modeled the supreme priority of this early watch, rising very early in the morning while it was still dark to go to a solitary place in prayer. To activate the 3 a.m. watch in your own life, set an alarm and commit to awakening at least 3 times per week. Initially, you are not required to do this every night. Begin with a pattern such as Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Pray for a minimum of 30 minutes. Focus your prayers on declarations of spiritual authority and specifically on breaking any nighttime attacks assigned against you. When you rise at 3 a.m. while in a state of fasting, you are literally stepping into the same dimension of authority that terrified every operative within my former coven. Permit me also to share the testimony of Pastor Baraka from Kampala. Pastor Baraka was a young minister who had recently founded a congregation in a rented hall within a busy district. He commenced with approximately 30 members, but his congregation was growing each week. One of our coven members resided near the hall and complained that the prayers emanating from this small assembly were disrupting our local spiritual activities. She formally requested that we orchestrate the shutdown of this gathering. I was assigned to monitor Pastor Baraka and identify his point of vulnerability. What I discovered shocked me profoundly. This young pastor awakened at 2:30 every single morning. By 3 a.m., he was already immersed in deep focused prayer. He would pray until 6 a.m., 3 full hours of concentrated intercession. And he maintained this discipline while also adhering to a lifestyle of regular fasting, abstaining from food 3 days every week, breaking his fast only in the evening. Our subsequent attacks against him proved completely useless. We dispatched spirits of discouragement to tempt him to abandon his ministry. They could not approach him. We sent spirits of temptation to entrap him in moral failure. They reported that the spiritual fire surrounding him was too intense to penetrate. We assigned spirits of financial pressure to devastate his resources. Conversely, his members began giving more generously than before, and new supporters appeared from unforeseen sources. After 3 consecutive months of failed campaigns, I went to report to our senior queen. She asked me at what precise hour he prayed. When I informed her 3 a.m., she simply nodded in solemn recognition. She stated, "Cease all operations against him. Any minister who has discovered and consistently occupies the 3 a.m. watch is permanently beyond our sphere of influence." His congregation subsequently grew from 30 members to over 300 within a single year. Today, that assembly stands as one of the largest and most influential in the region. And it all originated because one man comprehended and operated in the power of the 3 a.m. watch. At this moment, I urge you to go to the comments section and write, "I activate the 3 a.m. watch over my life." When you write that declaration, you are not merely typing words. You are issuing a legal spiritual decree in the realm of the spirit. You are announcing to every dark operative assigned to monitor and hinder your life that you have now discovered the divine secret of strategic timing. Do not simply watch this message and proceed passively. Participate actively. Write it in the comments. I activate the 3 a.m. watch over my life. Your personal breakthrough commences with your faithful declaration. The second fasting hour is 6 a.m. We designated this the hour of divine alignment. The 6 a.m. watch was another period that generated tremendous operational problems for our coven. We termed this the hour of alignment because this is the moment when the spiritual and physical dimensions synchronize. In the spirit realm, 6 a.m. signifies the sunrise of divine order being established for the new day. When a fasting believer is praying at this precise hour, they are aligning themselves with the very rhythm and governmental order of heaven. The ancient texts articulate this posture clearly. In the morning, the divine hears your voice. In the morning, you prepare your offering and wait expectantly. Let me share the account of Pastor Elimu from Dar es Salaam. Pastor Elimu led a congregation that was expanding rapidly within a coastal district. Our coven was determined to destroy his ministry before it grew too large for us to manage. We dispatched spirits of discouragement, they failed. We sent spirits of temptation, they failed. We assigned spirits of financial crisis, they failed. We launched spirits of sickness, they failed. Every weapon we assembled against this man was repelled as if he were surrounded by an impervious, invisible shield. I was personally assigned to monitor him for a period of 6 months. What I discovered made me understand definitively why all our attacks had proven futile. Every single morning at 6 a.m., without a single exception, Pastor Elimu was on his knees in dedicated prayer. He was also fasting 3 days every week. However, the pivotal key was not merely that he fasted, but that when he prayed during his fast, he always ensured he was positioned in prayer precisely at 6 a.m. One morning, I witnessed something through our spiritual surveillance that still haunts me to this day. It was one of his designated fasting days. He knelt in a small prayer room at exactly 6 a.m. as the first rays of sunlight permeated his window. An extraordinary event occurred in the spirit realm that I had never before witnessed. Angelic presences manifested, not merely one or two, but dozens of them. They surrounded him like an honor guard of soldiers surrounding their commander, and they remained stationed with him throughout the entire day. Every spirit we dispatched to attack him was immediately confronted and neutralized by these guardians. We could not gain any proximity to him whatsoever. I reported this phenomenon to our senior queen. She stated, "The 6 a.m. watch is the period when heaven assigns specific angelic protection for the coming day. A believer who is fasting and praying at this hour receives celestial reinforcement that we cannot possibly overcome. Disengage from Pastor Elimu permanently. We will never achieve success against him." The ancient texts affirm this daily renewal, declaring that the steadfast mercies of the divine never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is the faithfulness. The morning hour is uniquely connected to divine response and fresh heavenly attention. To activate the 6 a.m. watch, designate this as your consistent morning prayer time. Integrate it with your daily reading of sacred texts. Focus your prayers on aligning your will with the divine's purpose and specifically requesting angelic protection over your day, your family, and your endeavors. Even if you cannot awaken at 3 a.m., every day the 6 a.m. watch is accessible to most individuals and carries tremendous strategic power. I must be completely honest with you. Every time I share testimonies like that of Pastor Elimu, a profound stirring occurs within my spirit, a mixture of guilt and deep regret, because I was the one coordinating those attacks. I was the one dispatching spirits to monitor believers during their private prayers. I was the one synchronizing our assignments to strike when devoted people were most vulnerable. Now comprehending the damage I orchestrated, I possess a fervent desire to undo every fragment of it. This is why I wish to inform you about a resource known as the 21-Day Breakthrough Protocol. It is a comprehensive system designed to identify and dismantle the 7 primary assignments most commonly deployed against believers during my tenure in darkness. This protocol was developed by seasoned people with profound understanding of spiritual warfare, and I personally underwent this protocol following my deliverance. It constituted a vital part of my healing and restoration process, learning how to recognize and shatter every assignment I had ever placed upon individuals, and learning how to walk in the complete liberty that the divine purchased for me. If Mama Baridi had been aware of this protocol earlier, she might not have endured 2 months of suffering before discovering the power of the 3 a.m. watch. If Pastor Elimu had engaged this 21-day process at the inception of his ministry, his congregation might have experienced even more accelerated growth without the persistent attacks we launched against him. The link to this resource is available in the description below. Do not hesitate. The enemy does not rest or delay. If you have been fasting at random hours, if you have been missing these strategic divine appointments, I urge you to write in the comments, "I align my fasting with heaven's clock." Make that declaration today. Set your alarm for 6 a.m. tomorrow and observe faithfully how the spiritual atmosphere surrounding your life begins to undergo a tangible shift. The third fasting hour is 12 noon. We designated this the hour of covenant dissolution. 12 noon was a watch that we in the kingdom of darkness absolutely dreaded when believers comprehended its inherent power. This is the hour when the sun reaches its zenith in the sky. In the spiritual realm, this represents the apex of divine illumination. Hidden things become exposed. Secret covenants are dragged into the penetrating light of heaven. The majority of dark assignments are established and sustained through spiritual covenants or agreements. When a dark operative attacks an individual, they frequently enact a covenant in the spirit realm that grants them legal, persistent access to that person's life. This is the reason some attacks persist for years or even generations. The covenant remains active even after the originating practitioner has died. However, at 12 noon, a unique spiritual dynamic occurs. When a fasting believer prays at this hour with specific focused intention of breaking covenants, we witness covenants that had been entrenched for decades shatter in a single moment. Permit me to share the testimony of the Ndegwa family from Nakuru. This family had been bound under a witchcraft covenant for 4 consecutive generations. The covenant had been initiated by their great-grandmother, who dedicated her descendants to a coven in exchange for temporal wealth. Every generation, someone from this family suffered an unexplained death, experienced failed relationships, or endured financial collapse precisely when success seemed imminent. The current generation included a young woman named Chepkirui. She was a devout believer who could not comprehend why her life was plagued with inexplicable problems despite her sincere faith. Her business ventures failed on 3 separate occasions. 2 significant relationships dissolved mysteriously mere weeks before reaching their full commitment. Her health deteriorated without any medical explanation. What Chepkirui did not know was that our coven received regular spiritual reports on her family. We were simply collecting what had been promised to us 4 generations prior. The covenant remained fully active. The spiritual debt was still being exacted. Then Chepkirui encountered a discerning spiritual elder who informed her concerning generational covenants. The elder instructed her to commence a 40-day fast focused specifically on breaking these ancestral covenants. He directed that every day at precisely 12 noon, she must pray specifically for covenant dissolution. Chepkirui obeyed this instruction meticulously. Our coven received an immediate spiritual alert that a significant shift had occurred in the atmosphere surrounding her. Our monitoring spirit reported that the covenant documents pertaining to her family in the spirit realm were beginning to smolder and burn. The spiritual records containing her family's names were catching fire sequentially. I was dispatched to investigate this personally. What I witnessed on the 21st day of her fast altered everything I believed I understood about spiritual power. At exactly 12 noon, Chepkirui knelt in her room and began to pray. She invoked the full authority of divine covenant power to break every agreement her ancestors had enacted with darkness. As she prayed, I observed a spiritual covenant that had bound her family for 4 generations literally disintegrate. The document in the spirit realm simply erupted into flames. Angelic presences materialized and began severing the invisible chains that had been attached to her bloodline. By the 40th day, the covenant was completely and permanently destroyed. Our coven had lost all legal spiritual access to the Ndegwa family in perpetuity. The senior operative who had managed their file for decades was incensed. She attempted to recreate the spiritual document. It would not form. She attempted to establish a new covenant. It would not adhere. Within a single year, Chepkirui's business succeeded beyond her most optimistic dreams. She entered a genuinely fulfilling relationship and partnership. Her health was entirely restored. The multi-generational pattern that had plagued her lineage was broken permanently. The ancient texts provide clear precedent for noon prayer. A great apostle went up to the rooftop about the 6th hour to pray. This was the 6th hour, 12 noon, and it was during this prayer watch that he received a monumental vision that altered the course of an entire movement. Thus noon is established as an hour of profound revelation and covenant-altering shift. To activate the 12:00 noon watch, consecrate your midday break as a dedicated prayer watch. Even 15 minutes of focused prayer at noon will significantly shift the spiritual atmosphere over your life. Focus your prayers specifically on covenant breaking, especially if you have awareness of generational strongholds or repeating patterns within your family lineage. Declare audibly that every ancestral covenant is cancelled and nullified by supreme divine authority. Then watch as hidden things are brought into the light. Let me share another case that demonstrates the formidable power of the noon watch. Brother Tumelo from Mwanza was a man who had labored under a peculiar pattern for 20 years. Every business enterprise he initiated would prosper for exactly 3 years and then collapse suddenly and completely. He had started and lost 6 distinct enterprises. Each venture followed the identical pattern: 3 years of growth followed by total devastation. Our coven was directly responsible for this cyclic curse. Tumelo's father had entered into a broken agreement with one of our members decades earlier, and that unresolved matter was spiritually converted into a covenant that deliberately limited his son's prosperity. Every 3 years we would activate this covenant and systematically dismantle whatever Tumelo had constructed. Tumelo had engaged in many fasts. He had prayed thousands of prayers. Nothing yielded permanent results because he lacked revelation concerning the strategic noon watch. Then a teacher instructed him concerning the power of covenant-breaking prayer at 12 noon. Tumelo commenced a 40-day fast, praying specifically at noon each day for the dissolution of this binding covenant. On the 14th day of his fast, I witnessed a terrifying event. As Tumelo prayed at 12 noon, a concentrated beam of divine light descended from above and struck the spiritual covenant document that had bound him for 2 decades. The record we had maintained for 20 years caught fire and was incinerated to ashes. That particular enterprise never collapsed again. It has now been operating successfully for 7 consecutive years. The 3-year cyclic pattern has been completely and irrevocably broken. If you discern repeating patterns in your life that persist regardless of your efforts, if you suspect unresolved covenants within your bloodline, I urge you to write in the comments, "Every generational covenant is broken at noon." Your ancestors may have signed those spiritual agreements, but you possess the divine authority to cancel them permanently. Before I proceed to unveil the 4th fasting watch, I need to pose a critical question. If what you have heard thus far has opened your spiritual eyes, if you are beginning to comprehend why your previous fasting may not have produced the expected results, please share this message with someone who desperately needs it. There are countless believers presently fasting at random times, wondering why no change is manifesting. There are people who have been bound by covenants for years without understanding the protocol for breaking them. You can be the divine conduit to bring them this revelatory truth. Share it immediately. The 4th fasting hour is 3 p.m. We designated this the hour of the covenant seal. The 3 p.m. watch was the most terrifying period for any dark operative or demon to encounter a fasting praying believer. This is because 3 p.m. marks the exact hour that the ancient sacred texts record as the moment of the greatest spiritual sacrifice ever completed in the history of creation. The moment when the declaration went forth, "It is finished." Within our coven, we were explicitly instructed never under any circumstances to attack a believer who was engaged in prayer at 3 p.m. Our senior queen explained it with stark simplicity. She stated, "At 3 p.m. the virtue of the covenant blood is at its freshest and most potent in the spirit realm. Any demonic entity or dark operative who approaches a praying believer during this hour risks total annihilation." Initially, I did not fully believe this warning. I considered it to be superstition, even within our own dark ranks. Consequently, I resolved to test it personally. There was a young woman named Sister Amina who had been consistently interfering with our operations in her neighborhood in the coastal region. She was not a recognized spiritual leader or minister. She was simply a devoted believer who prayed with notable frequency and fervor. Due to her prayers, 3 of our members in her vicinity had been exposed and their personal altars destroyed. I decided to attack her personally at 3 p.m. to prove our senior queen's warning was merely fear-mongering. I prepared myself for 3 days prior to the attack. I invoked the most powerful spirits under my authority. I gathered additional power from the coven's central altar. I was utterly determined to demonstrate that the 3 p.m. watch was nothing more than a superstitious legend. On the appointed day of the attack, I waited until exactly 3 p.m. Sister Amina was within a small room in a compound. She shared the compound with 3 other families but was alone in her room. At that moment, she was on her knees fasting and praying as was her daily afternoon custom. I will never forget the subsequent events. At precisely 3 p.m., I projected my spiritual consciousness towards Sister Amina's location. As I approached the compound, the spiritual atmosphere felt profoundly different from any previous attack I had conducted. A tangible weight, a dense sacred presence filled the air, making it difficult for my spiritual form to advance. I stubbornly pushed through this resistance. I was determined to proceed. When I reached the perimeter of her room, I encountered a sensation I had never before experienced. Intense, consuming heat. A wall of living fire surrounded her dwelling. It was not ordinary heat. It was alive, pulsating, and intelligent. It seemed acutely aware of my presence. I attempted to force my way through this barrier. The moment my spiritual form made contact, excruciating pain shot through my entire being. It was like plunging my hands into molten fire, a liquid spiritual flame. The agony was so severe I nearly retreated to my physical body immediately. However, my stubbornness prevailed. I withdrew slightly and attempted to locate a vulnerable point in his fiery shield. I circled her room, meticulously searching for any opening. None existed. The consuming fire enveloped her location completely. I withdrew to a greater distance and observed her from afar. What I saw caused my spiritual blood to run cold. Sister Amina was glowing, not metaphorically, but with a literal golden luminescence. This light emanated from within her being and extended outward, forming a radiant shield. Her lips moved in silent prayer. Her eyes were closed. She remained completely unaware of my presence, and positioned directly behind her, I beheld a presence so majestic and terrifying that I immediately fled in utter panic. It was a figure of supreme divine authority, standing behind her, with arms outstretched in a posture of protection and intercession. The wounds of sacrifice were visibly apparent, and from those wounds flowed living power that looked directly at me with absolute authority. I screamed and catapulted back into my physical body. For 3 subsequent days I was violently ill. My physical hands manifested burn marks as if I had touched actual flame. These burns required 2 weeks to heal fully. When I reported this harrowing experience to our senior queen, she was not angered. She was solemn. She simply said, "Now you possess experiential understanding. 3 p.m. is the sacred hour of the covenant seal. The power released there is eternally alive and potent at that moment. No demon can withstand it. No operative can survive an encounter with it. If you value your spiritual existence, you will never again initiate an attack during the 3 p.m. Watch. The ancient texts record this pivotal moment. When the 6th hour came, darkness covered the whole land until the 9th hour. And at the 9th hour the cry went forth from the place of sacrifice. The 9th hour in the ancient timekeeping system is 3 p.m. Further accounts describe the cosmic shifts that occurred at this hour. The sacred veil was torn, the earth shook, graves were opened. At 3 p.m., the power of sin, death, and bondage was conclusively defeated. To activate the 3 p.m. watch, set a daily alarm on your phone or watch. When it signals, pause whatever activity occupies you for a minimum of 5 minutes. Apply the covering of divine covenant power over your life, your family, and your mind. Declare aloud the finished, complete work of the sacrifice. This can be accomplished quietly at your workplace if necessary. Understand that even a brief focused prayer at 3 p.m. carries exponentially greater spiritual authority than extended prayers at other less strategic times. There was another woman named Imani who resided in Mombasa. She had been dedicated to our coven before her birth by her own grandmother. From her childhood, we had assigned specific spirits to monitor her and ensure she would eventually enter the service of darkness. However, Imani experienced a genuine transformation and spiritual awakening at age 18. She had no conscious knowledge of the prenatal dedication, but she keenly felt its oppressive effects, strange dreams, unexplained failures, and relationships that consistently dissolved. Imani joined a prayer gathering that convened every day at 3 p.m. They identified themselves as Covenant Blood Prayer Warriors. Every afternoon at precisely 3 p.m., they would collectively apply divine covenant protection over their lives, families, and city. Our coven became alarmed. The spirits we had assigned to Imani began sending back increasingly distressed reports. They indicated that every day at 3 p.m., the blood covenant we had established over her life was being systematically weakened. The spiritual chains were loosening. The senior operative managing Imani's file dispatched more potent spirits to reinforce the covenant. However, when these enhanced spirits arrived at 3 p.m., they encountered the living power of divine sacrifice in a manner that led to their destruction. 3 of our most formidable spirits were consumed that day. They simply ceased to exist. Within 6 months, Imani was entirely free. The dedication enacted by her grandmother was permanently broken. She subsequently developed into a powerful intercessor who has assisted in delivering hundreds of individuals from witchcraft bondage. If you suspect any form of dedication to darkness over your life, if you believe pre-birth covenants exist concerning your destiny, write in the comments, "The power of the divine covers me" at 3 p.m. Every dedication is broken today. The fifth fasting hour is 6 p.m. We designated this the hour of the evening oblation. Within the ancient sacrificial system recorded in the sacred texts, priests presented two daily offerings, the morning sacrifice and the evening sacrifice. These offerings prophetically foreshadowed the ultimate sacrifice of divine love. Even today, these historical hours retain a residual spiritual potency that actively impacts the spirit realm. 8 p.m. is particularly powerful because it marks the transitional period when the spiritual atmosphere shifts from the dominion of day into the watches of the night. Within our coven, we consider the nighttime hours our sovereign territory. We operated under the belief that once the sun set, we possessed greater liberty to operate. Darkness was our ally. The night was our exclusive hunting ground. The majority of our attacks were scheduled for nighttime. We would dispatch spirits of nightmares between midnight and 4 a.m. We would manipulate dreams, provoke accidents during hours of darkness, and attack household covenants while families slept. The night belonged to us, or so we arrogantly presumed. However, when a believer was engaged in fasting and prayer at 6 p.m., a profoundly unusual dynamic occurred. The transition from day to night did not grant us the anticipated access. Instead, the believer's prayers established a hedge of protection that remained efficacious throughout the entire night. It was as if they had spiritually locked every door and shuttered every window before the darkness could fully descend. Allow me to share the testimony of the Wekesa family. They resided in a densely populated district of Nairobi, in a home our coven had specifically marked for destruction. The father had deeply offended a senior operative by repeatedly refusing invitations to join our organization. Consequently, the operative decreed to make a stark example of him. For months we attacked his family every night. We dispatched spirits of nightmares, spirits instigating accidents, and spirits of sudden misfortune. Night after night we launched assault after assault. Nothing succeeded. I was dispatched to investigate this operational failure. What I discovered astonished me. Every evening, at exactly 6 p.m., the entire Wekesa family assembled in their living room. They would pray together for 1 full hour while simultaneously fasting from their evening meal. They maintained this discipline every single day without exception. The father would lead the prayer, the mother would intercede fervently, and even the children participated. Their 6 p.m. prayers created a spiritual seal over their household that we could not penetrate. Every attack we launched at night simply rebounded off an invisible, impenetrable shield. Through our monitoring spirits, we could observe their home, but we could not enter. It was like viewing a house through an unbreakable glass barrier. We persisted for 6 months. We failed for 6 months. Finally, our senior queen commanded the cessation of all attacks. She declared that any family maintaining consistent 6 p.m. prayer, coupled with fasting, operates under the enduring covenant of the evening sacrifice. The power of the divine covers their nights. She stated, "We cannot touch them." The ancient texts demonstrate this practice. A great leader rose from his fasting at the time of the evening sacrifice, fell upon his knees, and spread out his hands in prayer. Another account confirms this hour's significance, noting that a divine messenger visited a great prophet at the time of the evening sacrifice. This watch is intrinsically connected to angelic visitation and decisive divine intervention. To activate the 6 p.m. watch, commit to praying before you partake of your evening meal. Dedicate this time to sealing your night with prayer. Petition the divine to place a hedge of protection around your home and family throughout the darkness. This practice is especially critical if you have been experiencing nocturnal attacks, oppressive dreams, or sleep disturbances. The spiritual covering established through this evening oblation remains effective until the morning light. Now let me conclude this section with the testimony of Brother Jabulani, a security professional working in downtown Nairobi. He was a simple yet profoundly committed believer with a powerful prayer life. Every evening at 6 p.m., irrespective of his location, Brother Jabulani would pause to pray. If he was on duty, he would locate a quiet corner. If he was at home, he would gather his family. The 6 p.m. watch was sacred to him. Our coven discovered Brother Jabulani because his wife was a specific target. Her own sibling was a coven member who desired to destroy their household. For 3 months we attacked their home every night. Nothing succeeded because of his unwavering 6 p.m. prayers. A powerful spiritual seal was placed over his dwelling. Each evening our spirits could perceive his home, but they were utterly barred from entry. We persisted for 3 months. We failed for 3 months. The sibling who had requested the attack eventually surrendered in frustration. She departed from the coven a year later and began walking in the light herself. The tangible testimony of Brother Jabilani's protected family was a pivotal factor in convincing her of the superior power found in alignment with the divine. Now permit me to synthesize this revelatory teaching for you. These 5 fasting watches are not magical formulas, nor are they human superstitions or religious traditions. They are strategic divine appointments when the spiritual realm is most responsive to the petitions of consecrated believers. These are the hours when heaven's gates open most widely. These are the moments when your prayers carry maximum jurisdictional authority. When you fast during these specific watches, you are not merely denying your physical body nourishment. You are positioning yourself at the exact temporal coordinates where divine power flows with greatest intensity. You are aligning your spiritual warfare with the intrinsic rhythm of heaven itself. Reflect upon the revelation shared today. 3 a.m. is the watch of total spiritual authority when divine power flows strongest. And divine a.m. is the watch of divine alignment when angelic reinforcement is assigned. 12 noon is the watch of covenant dissolution when generational curses are destroyed. 3 p.m. is the watch of the covenant seal when divine sacrifice power is most potent. 6 p.m. is the watch of the evening oblation when your night is sealed from demonic intrusion. During my tenure as a temporal specialist for the kingdom of darkness, I observed countless believers operate in ignorance of these strategic hours. They fasted randomly, prayed without divine timing, and labored diligently in the spirit at inopportune moments, allowing us to circumvent their spiritual activities by attacking during the watches they left unguarded. However, the believers who discerned and utilized these hours became utterly untouchable. Their assigned mandates were impossible to execute. Their spiritual covenants could not be enforced. Their families enjoyed around-the-clock protection. Their breakthroughs manifested without the protracted delays we sought to engineer. When you integrate all 5 watches within a focused period of fasting, the spiritual results are exponential. The combination forges a comprehensive coverage that eliminates all gaps for the enemy to exploit. Consider the powerful testimony of Sister Malika from Dar es Salaam. She was a young professional under severe witchcraft assault for 3 years. Her career was stagnant while colleagues advanced. Her relationships failed repeatedly. She had undertaken numerous extended fasts, visited spiritual elders, and received prayer, all without lasting victory. Because she lacked revelation concerning divine timing, our coven had assigned 5 specialized spirits to various areas of her life, maintaining relentless pressure. Then she received teaching on the 5 fasting watches. Sister Malika committed to a 21-day fast, structuring her entire day around prayer at 3 a.m., 6 a.m., 12 noon, 3 p.m., and 6 p.m. I monitored this period, and what I witnessed was the systematic demolition of our kingdom's work against her. On day 3, the career spirits fled. On day 7 at 12:00 noon, the covenant hindering her relationships was incinerated. On day 10, spirits of sickness were expelled. On day 17 at 3 p.m., I beheld the Supreme Divine Presence minister to her personally, permanently canceling every assignment. By day 21, she was completely free. Within 6 months, she received double promotion. Within a year, she entered a genuinely fulfilling partnership. Within 2 years, she experienced restoration in areas that had seemed permanently closed. The 5 strategic fasting watches had rendered every dark assignment against her absolutely impossible. Now I desire to pray a prophetic prayer of activation with you. I want to activate these 5 fasting watches over your life at this very moment. It is imperative that you pray this decree aloud. For when you declare with your mouth, a definitive shift is mandated in the spirit realm. Wherever you are, proclaim this with me. Sovereign of all creation, I approach your throne of grace with gratitude and faith. I thank you for the revelation of strategic timing in spiritual warfare. I thank you for exposing the concealed secrets of the kingdom of darkness so that I may walk in comprehensive victory. Today, I solemnly commit to utilizing the 5 fasting watches that render every dark assignment impossible. At 3 a.m., I will rise and seek your face. I receive total spiritual authority in this watch. Every demonic entity operating in the night watches, I command you to flee from my life. My prayers at 3 a.m. carry the resonant power of the divine at its highest authority. I am unstoppable in this hour. At 6 a.m., I will align myself with divine order. I receive angelic assignments and supernatural protection. Heavenly guardians, I welcome you into my day. Cover me, guide me, and warfare on my behalf. My 6 a.m. prayers release divine alignment that no witchcraft can disrupt. At 12 noon, I will break every covenant, every agreement my ancestors enacted with darkness. I cancel them now by the full authority of the divine. Every spiritual document bearing my name I command to be consumed by sacred fire. The power of the covenant destroys every generational curse. My noon prayers release covenant-breaking power that liberates my entire bloodline. At 3 p.m., I will stand at the place of the covenant seal. I apply the full power of the divine sacrifice over my life, my family, and my destiny. The power released at this precise hour now covers me completely. No demon can approach, no dark operative can attack, no curse can successfully land. I am eternally protected by sacred covenant power in the spirit realm. At 6 p.m., I will seal my night under the covenant of the evening sacrifice. Every spirit that lurks waiting for darkness to attack, you are denied all access to my home, my family, and my life. My evening prayers establish a hedge of protection that endures until morning's light. I decree that from this day forward, every dark assignment directed against me is impossible to execute. My fasting is no longer random. My prayers are no longer unstrategic. I am a spiritual warrior who understands and operates by the clock of heaven. Every spirit tormenting me, your time is concluded. Every curse pursuing me, you are broken. Every covenant binding me, you are dissolved. I am free. I am protected. I am unstoppable in the mighty name of the divine. Let it be established. Amen. If you prayed that decree with me, a definitive shift has been mandated in the spiritual realm. The demonic entities assigned to monitor and hinder your life have just received legal notice that you have discovered the divine secret of strategic timing. I strongly encourage you to subscribe to this channel to continue receiving revelatory teachings that will equip you to walk in complete victory. Each week I expose further secrets that the kingdom of darkness desperately desires to keep concealed. Now allow me to provide you with practical steps for implementation. For 3 a.m., begin with Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Set your alarm for 2:45 a.m. Pray for a minimum of 30 minutes, focusing on authority declarations. For 6 a.m., establish this as your consistent morning prayer watch. Combine it with meditation on sacred texts. Pray for alignment and angelic assistance. For 12 noon, utilize your midday break. Dedicate 15 minutes to covenant-breaking declarations. For 3 p.m., set a daily alarm. Pause for 5 minutes to apply divine covenant protection. For 6 p.m., pray before your evening meal. Seal your night and your household in prayer. When you undertake a fast, intentionally incorporate at least 3 of these watches. The more watches you cover, the more comprehensive the devastation you release against the kingdom of darkness opposing you. Now I require one final faith-filled declaration from you in the comment section. Write, "My fasting is now aligned with the clock of heaven." Write it and witness what the divine will orchestrate beginning today. Before I conclude, I have a final urgent request. If this message has opened your spiritual eyes to the reality of strategic spiritual warfare, please share this message immediately. There are multitudes of believers fasting without seeing results, praying fervently but at inopportune times. They urgently need this revelation. Comment below and indicate which of these 5 watches you commit to activating this week. I desire to hear your testimony. I need to know this revelation is spreading to every believer in need. Remember, we are not merely a channel. We are a liberation movement. We are breaking covenants, exposing darkness, and equipping people of faith for effective end-time warfare. My name is Zawadi Ochieng. I served the kingdom of darkness for 13 years. But the divine set me gloriously free. Now I am devoting the remainder of my life to dismantling everything I was formerly commissioned to build. The kingdom of darkness is terrified of informed believers. As of today, you are informed. As of today, you are spiritually dangerous. As of today, every dark assignment against your life, your family, and your destiny is declared impossible. Now walk fully in your ordained victory. May the divine abundantly bless you.